Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 7. Tally kept her promise and went back to visit Alder the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the day after that, until the days started blending together, and soon enough she was visiting Alder every single day. It was easy enough to slip away from her sisters for a few hours every day. Raelle had witch bomb training every day after lunch, and Abigail would either spend those 2 hours practicing her blasting or spending time with Adele. And so Tally would find herself making her way to the shed that hid Alder's safe house. Those 2 hours of every day that she spent with Alder quickly became her favorite. While spending one-on-one time with Alder had made her nervous at first, it was something that she had very quickly overcome. Alder was nothing but nice to her, and if there was any part of Tally left that had still thought that Alder harbored any semblance of resentment for what happened in their past, the kindness in which Alder treated her every time they met quickly assuaged those fears. At some point, and Tally wasn't sure when, Alder had stopped being Alder and started being Sarah. Perhaps it was when Tally realized delightfully that Sarah had a sense of humor. When she had mentioned this realization to the other woman, Sarah had simply quirked an eyebrow at her, and with a smirk said, "Do you really think I could live over 300 years and not have one?" Or perhaps it was with the patience and honesty that Sarah would give her whenever she would answer Tally's eager questions about the past. Tally was careful to avoid any questions that Sarah might have deemed too personal, and would instead ask ones ranging anywhere from the creation of the Hague, nowhere near as exciting as Tally imagined, to what it was like living through the inventions of electricity. Sarah's favorite invention, second only to indoor plumbing. Or, Tally mused as she watched Sarah, who was currently staring intently at the chessboard between the two of them. Perhaps it was simply how well she had gotten to know the former general. From her favorite color, red, to her favorite food, Sarah had deliberated over this for quite some time, before finally, to Tally's surprise, coming to the decision that it was chocolate ice cream. To her favorite season, winter, Tally had adored and soaked up every little detail that Sarah offered up about herself. Sarah had also taken it upon herself to teach Tally chess. While Tally had never played the game before in her life, she had learned a little bit about it from her time spent as a biddy and watching the others play it, both with Sarah and among themselves. Tally fought back a blush as she remembered the time she confidently told Sarah that she knew how to play, only for the other woman to beat her in 3 moves. Tally had been embarrassed, of course, but the flabbergasted look on her face after Sarah had smugly proclaimed "checkmate" had prompted an unfiltered, genuine laugh from Sarah, that had sent Tally's heart racing, and she quickly decided that she was okay with being embarrassed. After Sarah had beaten Tally just as quickly a few more times, Sarah had stopped letting Tally make quick decisions and started teaching her as they played. Gentle reminders to watch where she placed her pieces, to make sure she wasn't leaving her king vulnerable, to remember to utilize her queen properly. Sarah's reminders were never mocking or condescending, and more than once she would let Tally take back a turn and try again. Tally still had yet to beat Sarah, of course, but frankly, Tally couldn't have cared less about that. She was just glad to be able to spend time with her. Sarah also had, after Tally was slayed to strategic and tactical thinking a few times after staying too long, begun setting an alarm for whenever Tally had to leave. Tally had protested at first, claiming it wasn't necessary, but Sarah had given her a look that left no room for argument, and Tally was secretly thankful for it. She didn't feel like getting chewed out by Major Klein any more than strictly necessary. Sarah finally seemed to decide on a move, the movement of her arm bringing Tally back to the present. She watched as Sarah moved her bishop forward to capture Tally's last remaining knight and set her king in check in one swift movement. "Check," she said, finally looking up from the board to meet Tally's gaze. Tally frowned, looking down at the board, still feeling Sarah's gaze on her. It took her a few moments to spot a solution, and she reached out, grabbing her rook. "Wait." Sarah's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, stopping Tally from moving her piece. "Look how vulnerable you're leaving your king if you move that rook. I'll get a checkmate next turn if you do that." Tally set her rook back down, Sarah letting go of her wrist as she did. "But the only other move I could make would be with my queen, and that would allow you to capture her next turn." "But you would still have a chance at winning," Sarah reminded her gently. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice your queen in order to keep going." Tally pulled a face. Would I actually have a chance, or would I just be prolonging the inevitable? Sarah motioned to the board with her hand. "Why don't you find out?" It turned out, as Tally had guessed, she was just prolonging the inevitable. Several turns later, Sarah was putting her king in checkmate, Tally huffing indignantly as she flopped back against the couch. "Has anybody ever actually beaten you at chess in the last couple centuries? Be honest." Sarah laughed, a sound Tally was never going to tire of. "Occasionally one of the biddies would, but not very often," she admitted. "When you've been playing the same game as long as I have, you tend to learn all the tips and tricks. All your opponents become readable, and it's hard for anyone to take you by surprise." Sarah moved to gather up the pieces that had become scattered across the table, her hair falling over her face, partially blocking it from Tally's view. "It must be like that for you in general, huh?" Sarah's hand stilled over one of the pieces, and she turned to look at Tally, brushing her hair away from her face. "What do you mean?" "Well, I just mean you're the longest living person in, like, the whole world." Tally chuckled nervously. "People, no matter where they are from, are probably all the same, predictable. It's probably hard for anyone to take you by surprise about anything." Sarah nodded slowly as she took in Tally's words, slowly sitting up straight, the chess pieces on the table forgotten. "I thought that was true for a long time," she admitted. "What changed?" Tally couldn't help her curiosity. Sarah regarded her for a few moments. "Honestly, you did." "Me?" Tally squeaked. Yes. You took me by surprise first in the interim, whenever you offered yourself over as a biddy, and then again after the surgery, when you were so open about missing me. Sarah was still looking at Tally, but there was something close to hesitancy in her eyes. I knew, realistically, that you were most likely experiencing that as a side effect, but I never expected you to admit it to my face. Oh, Tally's face was burning as her gaze dropped from Sarah to stare at the scattered chess pieces on the table between them. Well, I guess I had. I didn't... Tally. Sarah leaned across the table, resting her elbows on it. I didn't say I minded. Oh, was all Tally was able to say again, and she bit her lip to keep a smile from breaking out over it. I never did tell you that I had been missing you too. The smile disappeared from Tally's face, and her head shot back up to stare at Sarah. You did? She almost whispered. Yes, of course, Sarah said simply, as if it were obvious. The bond went both ways, Tally. It was only natural that I would miss you as well. Why do you think I visited your coven not long after? Tally gaped at her. I thought you did that for everybody. Sarah laughed at that, leaning back against her own sofa. I didn't. It was just an excuse, when I think that had your coven leader confused. Tally's heart was hammering in her chest at Sarah's confession. Why didn't you tell me? Biddy or not, I feel it would have been inappropriate for me to confess that to a cadet, or frankly any soldier under my command. And now? Tally asked timidly. Well, now I'm not your CO anymore, am I? Sarah's voice was impossibly soft as she looked at Tally. I see no harm in admitting it now. Tally nodded quickly, trying not to think about the implications of Sarah no longer being her commanding officer. Well, I am glad you told me. Whatever Sarah had been going to say next was lost among the shrill ringing of the alarm sounding. Tally jumped, the loud noise taking her by surprise, but Sarah just turned and frowned at the noise, as if it were a person that had interrupted them, and not an alarm that she herself had set. They both stood at the same time, Tally getting ready to leave, and Sarah walking over to the clock and turning the alarm off. Tally stopped before opening the door, turning to smile at Sarah, who was watching her. Thank you for coming, Tally. Tally rolled her eyes affectionately. You don't have to thank me every time, you know. It's not like this is a chore for me. Sarah smirked lightly, shifting her weight back and forth between her legs. Be that as it may, I am still thankful that you come to keep me company every day, and for your friendship. Oh, well... Tally knew she was blushing, something she was sure she did an awful lot of in Sarah's presence. I'm thankful for your friendship too, Sarah. Sarah inhaled sharply at that, Tally worrying for a brief moment that she had said something wrong, but then Sarah smiled at her again. I'll see you again tomorrow? Yes, Tally answered quickly, unable to hold back her grin. I will be a little late, but I will still be here. Sarah's eyebrows furrowed at that. Is everything all right? Oh, yeah, Tally chewed on her lip nervously. I decided I'm gonna try to call my mom again tomorrow. I haven't spoken to her since right after the Camarilla attack. It didn't end well, like usual, but it's been long enough. I figured I should try again. Sarah didn't say anything at first, just hummed in agreement with a small nod of her head. All right then. I hope it goes well for you. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow, Telly. Have a good rest of your day, Sarah said as she leaned down to once again start picking up the chess pieces. Bye, Sarah. Telly always hated leaving, but seeing as how she couldn't stand there all day and watch Sarah clean up, and how she really didn't want to get scolded by Major Klein again, she forced herself to leave, unaware that Sarah had looked up to watch her go. Sarah needed to get a grip. Telly was only 20 minutes late, and for God's sake, she had known that Telly was going to be late today. But for some reason, she couldn't shake the anxiety that was currently causing her to pace back and forth across the small living room. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt like this. Anxiety, or was it panic, she thought almost mildly, was making her skin crawl, forcing its way into her chest in painful waves, forcing her to take deep, slow breaths as she walked purposefully back and forth across the room. It wasn't until she walked into the kitchen to take a swig of whiskey straight from the bottle, the sharp, comforting burn doing nothing to soothe the nerves she was currently feeling, that a single, horrifying thought crossed her mind, causing a fresh wave of anxiety to go crashing through her. Because it wasn't her anxiety that she had been feeling, Sarah realized, slamming the bottle down onto the counter in a panic as she turned and all but sprinted out of the room. It was Tally's. Sarah took the stairs, 2 at a time, already singing the seed that caused the world around her to shimmer as she slipped into invisibility. As she stepped outside, the bitter chill of the late fall bit into her skin, and she dimly realized she had forgotten a jacket. But as another jolt of anxiety from Telly went through her, Sarah decided that she didn't care. Following the feeling in her gut, the magic that was leading her to Telly, the anxiety that was coming from Telly, was almost enough to send Sarah to her knees, but it was her own worry that kept her going. She had to make sure that Telly was okay. Sarah rounded the corner of a building that was no longer used, and her heart dropped in her stomach as she finally laid eyes on Telly. The girl was sitting, leaned up against the wall, with her knees drawn up to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her head was pressed against her knees, and Sarah didn't have to be close to her to know that she was crying. Without even thinking, Sarah walked forward, kneeling down next to Telly. She hummed low in her throat, extending the invisibility to stretch to Telly as well, ensuring that Telly could not only physically see her, but no one would come across them as well. She reached out and then hesitated, unsure if she should touch Telly, or if that would only serve to make things worse. Another sob jerked through Telly's body, causing Sarah's heart to constrict painfully with it. She slowly reached out, brushing her hand gently against Telly's shoulder. Telly. Telly's head jerked up, her face wet with tears, reeling back slightly at the sight of Sarah. "Sarah?" she gasped out. Sarah barely had time to nod in response before Telly let out another sob, this time reaching out for Sarah as she did so. Her arms went around Sarah's neck, as Sarah instinctively grabbed Telly's waist and pulled her into her lap, sitting down with her back against the wall. Telly buried her face into Sarah's neck as Sarah wrapped her arms tightly around the younger woman. "Breathe, Telly," she whispered softly into her hair as Telly continued to sob in her arms. After a moment's consideration, Sarah began to rub her hand soothingly up and down Telly's back. "Remember to breathe for me," she coaxed. Minutes passed by, and eventually Telly's sobs lessened into quiet, shaky breaths, but she had yet to move from where she was being held by Sarah, and so Sarah continued to move her hand in a comforting motion on Tally's back, content to stay there until Tally decided she was ready to move. A sharp inhale of breath came from Tally as she slowly pulled back, sitting upright. Sarah's arms loosened their grip, her hand dropping down from Tally's back to rest on her waist, still holding on to her. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sarah asked softly. The panic she had been feeling from Tally had disappeared, making it easier for them both to breathe and to think. Tally swallowed harshly. "Not particularly." "Okay," Sarah nodded. "That's okay." Tally was quiet for a couple moments before taking another long, shaky breath. "She didn't want to talk to me." It took Sarah a minute to realize what Tally had meant. "Your mother?" Tally nodded a little too quickly, bringing up a sleeve to wipe away some fresh tears. Sarah squeezed her hip gently at the sight. "She stayed on the line for all of 2 minutes before she just said she couldn't do it and hung up." "Oh, Tally," Sarah breathed. No wonder she had felt such strong emotions coming from Tally through the link. "So, yeah, I just lost it, I guess." Tally laughed, embarrassed. "I knew it probably wasn't gonna go well, but I thought you would at least want to—" Her voice cracked, and she stopped talking, shaking her head. "Sorry," she whispered. "No," Sarah said firmly, squeezing Tally's hip again. "You don't get to apologize for this. Not now. Not ever. Okay?" "I'm just so sick of crying," Tally laughed shakily. "And crying in someone else's arms. That's a special kind of embarrassing." Sarah tilted her head. "You think this is embarrassing?" Tally turned to look at her finally, her eyes red and puffy. "This is the 4th time in like a month that I've broken down in tears in someone else's arms. And one of those other times that person was you." Tally smiled weakly at her. "It's kind of embarrassing." Then she frowned and pulled back slightly. "Wait, what are you even doing here? How did you find me? I don't even know where I went after the phone call. I just ran." "I felt your pain, the anxiety that you were experiencing," Sarah explained slowly. "When I realized it was yours, I was able to use whatever link we still have to find you. I could tell you needed someone." "Thank you for coming," Tally whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Of course." Sarah's voice was soft, something that Tally greedily thought she could get used to. "Do you feel me all the time? My emotions, I mean." Tally was looking at her curiously. Sarah shifted slightly under Tally, tightening her grip for a second to keep her from moving. "No, just the really strong ones, like this time." "I haven't felt any of your emotions since Anacostia brought you to see me again. That's why it took me so long to realize that they were yours." Tally nodded thoughtfully. Then she seemed to turn away, looking almost embarrassed. "Did you feel me the night you came back?" Sarah frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "The night you woke up. I could feel you then. Not your emotions, but just you. So strong, it was almost like you were right next to me. It made me miss you so much that I cried myself to sleep in Rael's arms. Could you feel me then?" "No, not that night." Sarah shook her head, trying to rid herself of the thought of Tally crying herself to sleep. "That night I was so wrapped up in my own emotions, I doubt I could have felt or processed anyone else's." "Why can't I feel yours?" The question took Sarah by surprise. My emotions? She laughed bitterly at that. I have no idea. Maybe I just don't have any. Sarah, Tally chastised her softly, looking at her in a way that made Sarah's heart pound. You and I both know that's not true. Sarah took a shaky breath, removing a hand from Tally's waist to tuck some of her hair behind her ear, stroking her temples softly. Would you like to? Feel them, I mean. Tally, whose head had practically melted into Sarah's touch, sat up straight at Sarah's words. Do you mean... I could link with you? Sarah swallowed harshly, hardly believing her own ears. If you want. Okay. Tally nodded quickly, turning further in Sarah's lap, so her legs were on either side of Sarah's waist. Sarah did her best to ignore the intimacy of the position, although trying to ignore the intimacy with someone you were about to link and share emotions with was frankly ridiculous, and leaned forward. Her fingers brushed more firmly against Tally's temple, bringing up her other hand to do the same on the other side, and she felt Tally lean forward as well, bringing the foreheads together. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out to find Tally's heartbeat, quick and stuttering, and gently coaxed it down, connecting it with her own. The sound of her heartbeat combined with Tally's thrummed loudly in her ears, and she was dimly aware of Tally's hands reaching down to rest on her waist. Sarah took a steadying breath, and, feeling Tally take it with her, began to gently bring up her recent memories that were entrenched in emotion. She felt Tally gasp, felt it resound in her own chest as the first memory and emotions tied to it showed up. It was the night she had woken up after being brought back to life, scared, confused, and angry. It was quickly replaced by a memory of seeing Anacostia again, happier than she had ever been in her life. Tally's hands tightened their grip on Sarah's waist as the next memory appeared, this one featuring Tally herself, and the agony and helplessness that Sarah had felt at watching Tally search for her, only to have her sisters convince her that she was truly dead. More memories appeared. Anger at Petra for not letting her see Tally at first was quickly replaced by surprise when she did agree. Nervousness and happiness combined into one confusing emotion at actually getting to see and speak to Tally again. Worry and anxiety when the days had gone by without Tally coming back. Uncertainty if she was ever going to. And then, finally, the relief when she had, and the happiness that followed every time Tally showed up at the door. Sarah poured all of her emotions into the link, careful not to overwhelm Tally, but taking great care to ensure that she could feel each and every one of them. As the last memory faded away, Sarah slowly released the link with Tally, feeling the girl take a stuttering breath, squeezing Sarah's hips tightly as she came back to herself. Her eyes fluttered open then, and Sarah realized with a jolt of horror that she was crying again. "Oh no, Tally, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Sarah," Tally whispered her name almost reverently, shaking her head to get the woman to stop apologizing. "That was one of the most incredible things I've ever felt. That was so much more surreal than anything I felt during the biddy bond. Tally cut herself off with a gasp. Sarah let her hands drop to Tally's shoulders. "So I didn't upset you again." Tally almost laughed at that, and it was then that Sarah realized curiously that Tally was crying tears of happiness. "No, Goddess, of course not." She looked at Sarah, an almost awestruck look on her face. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she whispered, "and for coming to find me today, and for trusting me to keep your secrets this time." Sarah's heart thudded in her chest at Tally's words, and she nodded uselessly. "You're welcome," was all she was able to say. Neither woman said anything for a while, until Tally shivered slightly from her position still on Sarah's lap, and she withdrew her hand from Sarah's waist to wrap them around herself again. "Goddess, how are you not freezing? I'm even wearing a jacket, and I think I'm colder than you are." Sarah opted to ignore the question. "If you're cold, we can go back to the safe house. There's still some time before you have to leave again." Tally nodded at that, suppressing another shiver. She tensed her leg muscles, getting ready to stand up, but before she could, Sarah was moving her hands from Tally's shoulders to her thighs, gripping them tightly as Sarah easily stood up, bringing Tally into a standing position with her. Tally bit down on her tongue to keep herself from reacting at the way Sarah had almost effortlessly lifted her up. She took a few steps back, trying to regain her thoughts, but when Sarah reached down to take Tally's hand in her own and thread their fingers together, almost like she had done it 1,000,000 times before, Tally's mind came to a screeching halt. Sarah squeezed her hand, tilting her head as she looked at her. "Are you ready?" Tally nodded, unable to say anything, loving the way her hand felt in Sarah's. Sarah nodded, smiling in response, and started walking back the way she had come from, Tally trailing wordlessly behind her.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.